Lancelot, Morgaine and Merlin are certainly legendary figures that most of us encountered numerous times. Whether that's in Disney's The Sword in the Stone from '63,
Now, my name is Merlin.
Excalibur from '81,
Behold the sword of power, Excalibur.
or Monty Python and the Holy Grail from '75.
Mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries.
But in every version, the story is being told a little bit differently, and King Arthur Knight's Tale is no exception. This tactics RPG gives the traditional story a very own spin. But before we delve into the details and also check how the game works on a mechanical level, let's have a look at some background information. The game has been developed by NeocoreGames, a studio which already did quite a few games before that. Among those are also 2 King Arthur games and various DLC. These, however, look more like games from the Total War series, and Neocore calls them role-playing war games. 2019, the concept of the next game had been developed, which should now become a tactics RPG. 2020, the game looked quite advanced already. NeocoreGames launched a Kickstarter campaign to gather more money to make the game bigger and better, and they collected 155,000 British pounds to do so. 1 year later, it was released in early access, and in 2022 it was time for the full release already, which was followed by multiple patches which also added more content. Does that mean that this is just some assembly line work, or do the developers just know how to do their stuff? Well, that's what we're going to check out in this review, in which, as usual, I will also explain all the important game mechanics. Let's start our journey to Camelot.
Camelot. Camelot. Camelot.
It's only a model.
You saw Camelot burning and watched the power of magic tearing apart the world at its seams. You led knights and monsters into a deadly storm of fury and blood. You destroyed the ladies of the sun and the lords of the winter.
As you might have guessed from the intro snippet you saw, this version of the tale is quite a bit darker, and it actually just starts after the events you usually come across in other movies and games. Arthur and Mordred killed each other on the battlefield and have thrown the world into chaos.
He struck you down. You both died. And yet, you both live.
While Arthur is now roaming around in Avalon as a zombie, terrorizing the world, we will take over the role of Mordred, his counterpart, who is being resurrected by the Lady of the Lake in order to kill Arthur again and bring an end to the misery.
I have brought you back to end this nightmare, Sir Mordred. I want you to go on a nightly quest. I want you to finish what you have begun. Kill King Arthur, or whatever he has become, after I took his dying vessel to Avalon.
So let's keep in mind that with Mordred we are playing a character who doesn't exactly have the most noble background, and we are located in a zombie-infested nightmare version of Avalon. You could say that the setting couldn't be much darker. And before I will go deeper into the different game elements and mechanics, I'd like to give you a brief overview of how the game is set up, so that you have a better picture about how those individual elements are actually working together.
And that's how the nightmare began.
Once we wake up as Mordred, we are on the tactical map, where we can freely move around and explore in real time. We can also find the one or another hidden treasure here, but we will not be able to access our inventory and the newly looted items just yet while being within the mission. The vast majority of our time in the game will be spent on combat though.
Surprise!
Which will also happen on this map, but the game will switch to a turn-based mode for that. We will use an action point-based system to shoot at our enemies, cast spells, and to run towards them to engage in melee combat. How we are going to use our action points is mostly left to us, but we will get back to that in just a bit. Once we finish a mission, a button will show up in our interface, which we can then use to leave the mission map. We will get a screen listing the experience our characters gained, the wounds they accumulated, and of course we will get a look at all the loot we found within the mission. And once we close that, we are on the world map. Depending on the mission we just completed, we will also get some new missions, which by the way are all manually designed and therefore neither random nor endless. Most of the time we will be able to choose between about 3 missions, and if it's less, then it's probably time to continue doing the main story mission. Which up to 4 characters we will take into the mission is mostly up to us. There are just a couple of story missions, which are about a specific character's story, and of course in these cases we will need to take that character with us. In addition to that, we are also getting text events, which we need to solve by picking one of the available decisions. These decisions will have an influence on the resources we are getting, but also on our alignment. There we can decide between being righteous or a tyrant, and between going for the Christian route or the old beliefs. Reaching certain values here will lead to further bonuses, but also unlock several new characters. Actually, it will unlock missions to get these characters, which means that choosing a different alignment will also lead to seeing different missions. After we have completed the second mission and rebuilt the foundations of Camelot, we will also be able to switch from the world map over to Camelot, which you can compare to the village in Darkest Dungeon, for example. We can expand this castle to give our characters more hit points and other bonuses. It is being used to treat our characters' wounds and to trade items. And of course you can also manage your inventory here. We also got a crypta for our fallen heroes here. Similarly as in XCOM or Jagged Alliance, characters who die are actually dead forever, unless you use some extremely rare items to resurrect them. While you can save at any point outside of combat in the normal mode, you can also play on Iron Man mode, where saving and loading is restricted, which will probably make the crypta a bit more frequented. So after each mission we are going back to Camelot, where we will take care of our castle and our characters, and then choose the mission we will do next. And that way we will of course also continue the story step by step.
Restoring the Excalibur.
Regarding the alignments, the outcome is pretty much what you would expect, unfortunately. If you first take an option in favor of the old beliefs and then one of Christianity, then they would basically even out and you would not receive any bonuses. Meaning that you will essentially decide for one of the sides near the start of the game and then just pick all the decisions which will add more points towards that alignment, which basically completely removes the deciding part from any of the story and event decisions. While it is nice that certain alignment levels will unlock special missions, it's still wasted potential. The event decisions would have offered some interesting choices otherwise. Righteousness in this world means that you don't show mercy with criminals and execute them, while the tyrant could actually use the criminals as cheap labor. It is a hard and brutal world, and Sir Mordred isn't a very pleasant ruler, even if he's having a nice day. Speaking of Mordred, I mentioned in the beginning that everyone will have had contact with the tales of King Arthur in some form. But I guess not everyone is super familiar with all the details of the story, and furthermore, the question is also which version of the story we are talking about, as there isn't just the one tale of King Arthur, but dozens of variations. So you might wonder, who is this Mordred guy actually? And according to Wikipedia, he might be the nephew, son or brother of Arthur. And Morgause is the half-sister or aunt of Arthur, and the mother or foster mother of Mordred, and sometimes she's also the same person as Morgana Le Fay, or her sister, or well, you get the point. And so it would have been nice if the game gave you a better overview what story it actually considers as canon. Especially at the beginning, I struggled a bit understanding what's actually going on, as the game also assumes that you know that Avalon is some kind of parallel world of the dead, which also got its own version of Camelot. I liked the very grim style and atmosphere, and the intro as well as the cutscenes are surprisingly well done. However, the story itself somewhat lost me after about half of the game, when the Sidhe, Seelie and Unseelie and their abstract fantasy worlds were introduced, which I had never heard of before. But it's not like it bothered me a lot. Also because the main focus of the game is clearly the combat.
The end is only the beginning, Sir Mordred.
And with that, let's head back to the tactical map. In most cases, combat starts either out of a dialogue or when we run towards certain positions on the map.
We're going to die here, you idiot.
But there are also battles where the player is shown in advance where exactly combat would be initiated. And in that case, it's useful to scout the area further in order to find additional entry points for that battle. Once the combat is triggered, the characters can then be freely positioned on all discovered starting positions, which can provide quite a big tactical advantage. In combat, one side will do all the actions with the characters, ends the turn, and then waits until the opponent finished doing the same. The first side to act in combat is almost always the player, so that it's extremely rare that the own characters already get damage even before you can do the first move.
Sinners shall bleed.
Each character usually starts out with about 8 action points, which can be used for any kind of action. A normal attack requires about 3 to 4 action points, depending on the class of the character. But the action point system is extremely dynamic. So melee fighters can wear heavier armor, which will offer better protection for the cost of an action point. If a character got a high loyalty, he or she can also get an additional action point. And then you also got weapons and abilities, which might change the situation further. And that's also especially true for yellow action points, which can then only be used for moving on the battlefield, but not for using abilities. And if you got some remaining points at the end of your turn, you can take some of them over to the next one. For example, 3 saved action points will result in getting 2 additional action points for the next turn. When planning to move to a different position, the interface will show you how far you can move in total, how far you can move if you still want to attack, and it will also show which enemies you can attack with ranged attacks from that new position, and whether these are behind any cover. When we mouse over an enemy, the interface will show us how far they will be able to move, and we can also see their character stats and abilities, which we can check out further by holding down the control key. The interface covers pretty much everything you could wish for, and feels extremely well thought out.
At your service, my lord.
Other than the standard attack, all active abilities depend on the character's skill choices in his or her talent tree, and that talent tree is based on which of the 6 classes the character belongs to. But that doesn't mean that each mage, for example, has the same talent tree. Instead, you could say that the class defines a pool of talents, and each character has different elements from this class pool in his or her own talent tree. And because all these additional actions are depending on the talent tree, that also means that you don't have like 10 to 20 abilities and you only ever use a few of them. Usually, any character will end up with about 5 active abilities, of which most are then also regularly used. And these active abilities can then also be modified within the character's talent tree. For example, an attack can also cause the enemy to ignite. It can have a reduced cooldown, destroy the target's armor, and so on. But the abilities are also very different by themselves already. There is hardly anything which you can just describe as the same but with different fluff. Mordred, as a melee fighter, can charge towards his target and knock it down, and throw lightning strikes at his enemies. Avalon, with his two-handed weapon, can use a mighty strike to destroy the target's armor or hit multiple enemies in a line. The marksman Geraint can shoot an arrow which will poison multiple targets in its destination. And the mage Merlin got the biggest selection of active abilities. Among these, a Metroid attack, an illusion which will draw the enemy's attacks, and a teleport spell. But there are also characters who can lay out traps, and there are spells which buff the characters. And in all cases, the interface will clearly show which range these spells got and what minimum damage they will do. There's one type of spell though, which is absolute standard in other games, which you will rarely find in this one. Healing spells. That means that hit points are actually an important resource you should really have an eye on. But there's another thing which is rather uncommon about it. King Arthur actually uses multiple values which represent how much beating your character can take. Armor isn't just a fixed value which is subtracted from any damage, but a resource in itself. Every attack on the character will also reduce the armor, making it an easier target. Damage which goes through the armor will then reduce hit points first. And once the hit points are gone, the character will lose vitality and receive serious wounds. Debuffs which you can't heal that easily. And once the character runs out of vitality, he dies. Permanently. While armor and also hit points can be healed up on the tactical map by using a very limited amount of resting spots, vitality and serious wounds can only be cured in Camelot, which also means that the character is out for at least one mission and will also not receive any experience. So generally you should definitely avoid any kind of damage on the character which goes beyond the hit points.
Just keep pretending that you have a plan, Mordred. The less we know, the better.
The combat area is relatively small and usually just leaves enough room to keep your distance from the enemies for 1 or 2 turns. But you can neither keep running away from the enemy, nor can you kite them easily. You can also let melee enemies approach you and then trigger your Overwatch attacks, which you would need to set up beforehand, selecting which tiles your character is going to cover. Generally, it's also important which direction the character is facing. If a character is being attacked from behind, then he will take more damage and can neither use his shield nor do any attacks of opportunity, which are automatic attacks on opponents leaving the melee range. These attacks of opportunity are also, you guessed it, clearly shown in the interface. Regarding the variety of enemies, the game also leaves little to be desired. Besides of bandits, picts and undead, who will actually stand up again unless you destroy their corpses, there are also the beforementioned Seelie, Unseelie and Fomorians. And all of these factions have multiple enemy types with their own special features and abilities. In my opinion, the tactical combat, which is clearly the centerpiece of the game, is absolutely top-notch. It offers a lot of variety and a great tactical depth, where you often start the battle thinking, how am I supposed to get out of that? And then manage to survive it using some clever moves and tactics. Furthermore, at least in the main campaign, King Arthur manages to accomplish that while keeping the luck aspect mostly irrelevant and also not becoming a puzzle game, which also wouldn't really be possible here, as the player just has too many options to individualize the own party. On missions where you don't need to have a specific story character, you could show up with 4 marksmen if you wanted to. Now, whether or not you would be successful with that is a different question. And even though the game got so much flexibility, it is also balanced quite well during the majority of the campaign. While there are missions every now and then that are a bit easier or a bit harder, which is kinda unavoidable with the dynamic group constellation, the overall difficulty is always on a somewhat fitting level. If you do all the side missions, then it might get a bit easy close to the end of the chapter, but once that new chapter started and new enemy types are introduced, the difficulty catches up and you might be breaking a sweat. This is also somewhat related to the fact that the characters receive only little or no experience at all if the mission is below the character's level, meaning that it's impossible to grow the level advantage beyond a certain point. And of course, there is not an endless amount of side quests in the first place. In regards to the character management, it's more problematic. Characters who spend the whole time sitting on the bench will fall behind in level significantly. While you can train them in Camelot to catch up, you need to keep in mind that you only have a limited amount of side missions, and therefore time is precious. So if you decide to make a character ready again after falling behind 5 levels, it will take at least 5 missions to catch up, and that will also contribute to another problem. Later in the game, we have a total of 12 knights at our round table, but there are much more than that offering to join. So you always have some uncertainty which characters you are supposed to take with you, and you continuously have to decide which character to kick out next. Every new character can have missions on his own, so that ideally you should have all characters in your roster for at least a short period of time. And if the round table is full and the maximum of 4 knights are waiting to join already, then any new knight wanting to join will basically mean that you will lose 1 knight without being able to temporarily put him or her into your party. And of course you won't know which characters to expect in the future and whether they will be better for you than the ones you already got. For example, they will get bonus morale if their alignment matches your own. And then all characters have individual versions of the class skill tree, of which you can't even see everything for the longest time. And that basically means that you might push Knight A for lots of missions even though Knight B would have been the better choice. And that's further exacerbated by the fact that you can also improve knights through unique potions. And of course, you don't want to waste these on anyone you're going to dismiss later on. This could have been diffused to some degree if you could at least see the talent trees in full right from the start. But I would also have wished that the maximum amount of waiting knights wasn't limited to 4, and that all characters would passively gain some experience, at least so that they don't fall behind by more than 5 levels. For players who are potentially bothered by something like this, I would recommend to check on external websites to see which characters are coming up so that you can plan accordingly, maybe after having played 10 of the over 100 hours of the main campaign. By then, you will have already decided on your alignments and have a pretty good feeling for the character's abilities. If you should mess up the character's skills, that's not a big issue by the way, as you can use an item to completely reset them.
Well, well, well. Sir Kay, King Arthur's seneschal, in a dungeon rotting away, a hero's reward.
But beyond this quite substantial main campaign, the game offers even more content. Once you finish the campaign, you can import your save game in either of the 2 Endgame seasons. These are basically separate campaigns with different missions on the same maps. However, these don't offer much in terms of story and are also only sparsely voiced. In the first of the 2 Endgame seasons, called The Chained God, we have to fight a threat of Fomorians invading Avalon, huge and brutal monsters from a different world. The game also introduces a new mechanic into this campaign, where enemies can drop soul shards which you can collect and then use to buy special items in Camelot. The problem? These shards, which look like spheres of light, disappear after a few turns, and potentially you don't even have a chance to collect them if you kill your enemies with some unlucky timing, which can get frustrating quickly. You will also come across Fomorian spires in some of the battles, which pose an additional threat by causing whirlwinds. But by destroying these, you can further upgrade the items you can buy via soul shards. The balancing of The Chained God is significantly less polished than that of the main campaign though, and especially the missions at the start are extremely brutal. I finished this endgame season before patch 2.0, which on top of the second endgame season also brought some general balancing changes. But I don't think that these will significantly improve the balancing of this content, which in total consists of 20 missions, which will take you about 40 hours to complete. The second endgame season, which was introduced with patch 2.0, is called Rising Eclipse. Again, we will do missions on the same maps with our team from the main campaign. It should be noted though that it's not possible to carry over a save game from the other endgame season. This time we are fighting against the She, the Seelie and Unseelie, also supernatural creatures from another world. There are now rifts in the missions, which the enemies will try to collect in order to buff all enemies until the end of the mission, and of course you should try to stop them from doing so. In fact, outside of combat you can collect these yourself, and then after the mission, back in Camelot, you can use their energy on a shrine of the She to unlock permanent bonuses for yourself. I mentioned the frustration added by the new Gods in Chains mechanic. In Rising Eclipse, it's even worse. Now, it's no longer about just defeating your enemies, but rather about stopping them from running onto these rifts, as you want to collect and use them yourself. Sometimes these rifts are really badly placed, and more often than not, you can't really predict what the enemy is going to do, which will necessarily lead to some fights becoming just trial and error. While it would probably be fine if you only collected about half of them to unlock the strongest bonuses, you don't really know. And of course, you don't want to get stuck either. It's certainly not as dramatic on the lower difficulty levels, but on the highest difficulty I found these mechanics, and therefore many fights, extremely annoying. This second endgame season has around 25 missions and will take around 50 hours to complete, if not even longer. In addition to these 2 endgame seasons, which are completely free of any costs, there's also a completely separate mini-campaign that only includes 3 missions and lets you play on the Fomorian side. It is free as well, a nice idea, but because of its very strict limitations, it doesn't offer you much room for own tactics and rather turns into a puzzle.
I'm not fighting that! God spare me! Run!
What a bunch of cowards.
But we are not yet done with the additional content. There's also a skirmish challenge mode, which consists of 4 disconnected series of battles. Each of these chains of skirmish battles consists of 10 maps, with only a single battle each, and as a result they turn pretty much into puzzles as well. Depending on how well you solve these puzzles, you get 1 to 5 stars and can then continue to the next map. If you aim for the best ratings, this will also become frustrating quickly, as you not only need to find the correct solution to the puzzle, but you might also need to restart the fight dozens of times as you rely on a lot of luck for some of the executions to succeed, which is just not fun. Sure, you don't need the best rating in every battle to complete it, but you probably wouldn't even play such a challenge mode in the first place if you weren't looking for the best ratings. And if that is only achievable with a lot of luck and frustration, then that's a fail in my book. While 2 of these chains of skirmish battles are available for free, the other 2 would need to be purchased for €5 or US$ each. What I saw in these battles didn't appeal to me at all, and I think you can better save the money. If you buy the game anyway, you can of course also check out the free puzzles and see for yourself. So all this additional content is a bit of a mixed bag. I would still rate The Chained God as quite good. Rising Eclipse is below that, the mini-campaign is rather mediocre, and the skirmish mode is to be ignored in my opinion. But the 100 hours of the main campaign are of course unaffected by this and offer a lot of fun already. In addition, a second playthrough with different morale decisions could also be interesting, as this would result in a couple of different missions, which also come with different characters for your roundtable, which might then also change your tactics down the line. Most of the content would remain the same, however. Oh, and then there's also the multiplayer mode, in case you feel like challenging your friends. Lastly, let's talk about graphics, sound and bugs. The game is pretty bug-free, but I did stumble over a few ones. More problematic were crashes, but these mostly happened within the second Endgame content after patch 2.0 was introduced, and since 2.01 the situation seems to have improved again. Overall, I would say that the game was not rushed, but actually polished quite well, especially concerning the main campaign, whereas the additional content clearly received less love. I think the graphics are pretty well done. However, I should probably mention that the design of the levels is extremely minimalistic, though it's not like the levels are just battlefields. A large part of the story and the voiceovers will be heard here. And yet, the environment design is the opposite of complex, even though the dark staging, with fog and small tornadoes sweeping away the leaves, conceals this quite well. A look at the graphics settings can also be worthwhile here, since you can adapt the look to your own taste and add just a bit more color into the world. I would describe the music as quite amazing. Especially the track from the world map has carried me away again and again. I could just stare at this map and listen to this atmospheric music all day. And with that, it's time to get to the conclusion. King Arthur: Knight's Tale is definitely not a game which was hastily put together or just some assembly line work. At least if we talk about the core of the game, which is the main campaign. NeocoreGames created a great tactics RPG which can convince through this whole main campaign, with its deep tactical battles, which are well balanced, a joy to play and free of frustration, also thanks to the great interface and lacking relevance of luck for the most part. The enemies are well designed and quite varied, with lots of different models and skill sets, and even the choices of your character's new abilities stay interesting for the longest time. While I did like the setting and the atmosphere, I would have preferred to get a better introduction into what this game considers as canon for the whole King Arthur tale. Furthermore, it would have been nice if the game stayed more down to earth in the second half of the game. The alignment system offers some nice rewards, and it's also cool that you can even unlock missions for additional characters using it. But a system like that always comes with the problem that you basically choose one alignment at the very start and then just limit yourself in your decisions for the rest of the game to actually get all these rewards. The one thing which bothered me more is the lack of planability regarding the characters. Well, this isn't a disaster, it's the main reason why the game, which can completely convince with its main campaign, only gets a solid thumbs up from me, but not a golden and sparkling thumbs up. But even just a full thumbs up means that I would recommend the game to everyone who's interested in tactical RPGs and can afford the quite substantial price of €45 or $45 US. It's definitely worth it. King Arthur: Knight's Tale offers more than 100 hours of fun, and it's an astonishingly rounded and well-polished game that has actually exceeded my own expectations. In regards of the additional content, that's quite a bit different. The endgame seasons are behind the main campaign, but are still okay overall. The Fomorian mini-campaign doesn't offer much besides of a short look on the other side, but the skirmish mode doesn't work well at all, and I also wouldn't want to pay $5 for additional challenges. By the way, King Arthur the 9th Legion, in which we are fighting on the side of the Romans against familiar enemies and will also meet the Knights of the Round Table again, is not an expansion of King Arthur Knight's Tale. Instead, it will be released shortly after this review as a separate game including 15 missions, so that the duration of the game is probably similar to that of an endgame season. Whether it also matches the quality of these seasons, or rather the one of the main campaign, will be a topic for a different time.
Only to arrive to the island between the realm of the living and the dead. Avalon.
And that's all from me regarding King Arthur Knight's Tale. How about you? Have you already played the game? And if so, what is your conclusion? Did this review make you want to take a look at the game yourself? Or was there anything unexpected which you didn't like? In any case, if this review was helpful, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you're interested in more content, mostly regarding role-playing and tactics games, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. I bid farewell from the beautiful Camelot. Until next time.
On second thoughts, let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
Right.